What's going on, guys? It's Zach here. Bring you guys another fantasy football video. Hopefully, you guys notice a different setup here. I'm traveling and visiting the grandma for the weekend or for Thanksgiving, so still trying to get the content out for you guys. But obviously, it's going to be a little bit different. But hopefully, everything goes smoothly, and hopefully, it's still getting you guys the same quality here. So this will be the Week 12 waiver wire video. We've obviously got a lot of players that I want to touch on. We've got 3 weeks left in most people's fantasy football regular seasons before we come up on the fantasy football playoffs. It was really exciting week 11. Not too many serious injuries. A couple we obviously got to talk about, but um, nothing that's too significant. I think we should be okay. And then obviously it should just be a lot of fun here, getting our teams all set. And then obviously we've got a lot of games on Thanksgiving as well. So it's going to be a lot of stuff that happens. Going to be a fun week of football. Obviously, we'll have the first Black Friday football game ever as well. So hopefully that game ends up being interesting. Hopefully we just get good next couple weeks here before we get into this fantasy playoff. So yeah, it should be a lot of fun. As always, if you guys have any specific ad drop questions, just let me know in the comments. I love helping you guys out there. And yeah, that being said, let's just get into this quarterbacks here. So I'll start things off with Jordan Love. I think he's actually a really high quality ad right now. He's got a lot of plus matchups coming up, starting things off with the Detroit Lions this next week. Lions just gave up quite a few passing yards to Justin Fields. The Bears or the Detroit Lions obviously have a much better run defense than pass defense. They honestly should have lost to the Chicago Bears this last week. I think Jordan Love's playing really well. Probably had his best game of his career so far just this last week. All the receivers look great as well. Jaden Reed's really coming into his own. Christian Watson looks a little bit healthier. Romeo Dobbs is playing well. Even Wicks is involved. And we just saw Aaron Jones go down with an injury. That means that we're going to see likely a lot more pass game out of this Green Bay Packers team. They're not going to be a team that's going to be able to use the run game too much. So I think Jordan Love is going to be a relatively decent fantasy streamer going forward. I'll next talk about Gardner Minshew, mainly just for this week. He's got a really plus matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Talked about Brock Purdy last week as one of the best streaming options of last week, and really it was just all because of the matchup. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. Gardner Minshew gets to draw them this week, so it should be a solid matchup. Derek Carr or Jameis Winston, I want to talk about them as well. The Saints have really good matchups in each of the next 2 weeks. Obviously, it's a little bit tough because we don't know exactly which one's going to be here. Derek Carr was playing really well, or mediocre, at least, really well for his standards, at least especially in terms of fantasy lately. Prior to going down with concussion, he's still in concussion protocol, so we could see Jameis Winston. And honestly, I think I would prefer Jameis Winston to Derek Carr in a vacuum. So if you want, like, if you miss out on all the guys this week and you just need to roll one out there, you could pick either one up off of waivers and then just pick whichever one up is going to start and think you'll do okay this week. And then Baker Mayfield, I'll talk about him as well. Same matchup or same game as Gardner Minshew. Should be a high scoring game. The Colts are obviously one of the most fast paced teams in the NFL. Two pretty bad defenses. I think that Bucks Colts game could end up being a lot of fun, and Baker Mayfield should be a really solid streaming option this week. Next, we got the big guys here. It's going to be the running backs. We'll start things off with Zach Charbonnet. It happened. We saw Kenneth Walker go down with an injury. We don't know exactly how long he's going to be out, but Pete Carroll was quoted saying that it was a legitimate oblique injury for Kenneth Walker. I don't know exactly how long that means. It doesn't sound like they're necessarily considering putting him on IR, so he might not necessarily miss the whole season, but I'd bet he misses the next couple of weeks. Obviously, it's a really tough matchup this week. And honestly, the next month for them is brutal. They have 2 games against the 49ers, 1 game against the Cowboys, and 1 game against the Eagles, although the Eagles did get run on pretty well this last week against the Chiefs. Pacheco had a pretty good game there, but on top of that, for the Seahawks, we could see Drew Lock under center this week, so I don't exactly love the matchup, but Charbonnet will be a workhorse for them in the event of Kenneth Walker not being there. He's obviously a good pass catcher. It's been rumored that they'll probably activate Kenny McIntosh. He's a really high quality pass catching running back. Really low drafted, but really talented player, really small. Probably would factor in on third downs at least a little bit. So I don't know that Zach Charbonnet gets like 100% workload by any means if Ken Walker misses, but he'd be a guy you could use like a low end running back too this week, even in a tough matchup. And obviously, for the next several weeks, if he actually shows that he's just that dude, he was drafted to be, he was a high second round draft pick, he could easily be a really good option. Devin Singletary, I'll talk about him. I doubt he's available, but at this point, even with Dameon Pierce coming back, I think it'd be really tough for the Texans to go away from him. They just look like a really good offense. There's going to be a lot of scoring opportunities for him, and he's just a good player. I've liked him even going back to Buffalo, and he's just a guy that needs to be on rosters going forward. Ty Chandler looked like the most explosive back that the Minnesota Vikings have. Obviously, Alexander Madison fumbled again for the Minnesota Vikings this last week as well. I think that we're seeing a potential change in the guard here. It just makes a lot of sense for them to want to use Ty Chandler. I did think Madison looked good as well up until that fumble, so it's a little harsh to say that Chandler is just going to take everything, but I think Chandler is a guy they're going to use on third downs. He's a guy that's a lot more explosive and just gives that offense a different element that Madison doesn't give. So I think Chandler's a guy that definitely needs to be rostered and probably has like flex potential every single week, especially in plus matchups. And this next week against the Chicago Bears, been pretty comfortable playing him as an option. Keaton Mitchell, I want to talk about him. We saw him take over a little bit more of the snaps this last Thursday. with Justice Hill basically just coming out of the rotation. It's basically a two-man backfield now with Keaton Mitchell and Gus Edwards. Obviously, a lot of the rushing touchdowns can go to Gus Edwards along with Lamar Jackson. So you're banking on a big play for Keaton Mitchell. He's kind of like a poor man's Devon Achane. Don't love it as an option, but he's someone that definitely needs to be on rosters, and we can see what happens with him. He's a guy that can certainly become fantasy relevant down the stretch. Speaking of Devon Achane, I want to talk about Salvon Ahmed. We saw Devon Achane leave this game with an injury, and in came Salvon Ahmed. Jeff Wilson was a healthy scratch this week. Obviously, they didn't want to put all four running backs in the active roster. Ahmed's the guy that's going to return kicks for them as well. So I think that Ahmed honestly probably is the number 2 running back if Achane misses more time. Not a great matchup this week against the New York Jets, but if you're in a really desperate situation, you could look his way. Roschon Johnson, I'll talk about him. We did see that Deonta Foreman left the game with an injury, and Roschon Johnson did outsnap Khalil Herbert after that point. Roschon Johnson looked good. He's a good pass catcher. This offense could take a step forward with Justin Fields under center, and I think it's safe to say that Roschon does need to be rostered in more leagues. Ezekiel Elliott, he needs to be rostered as well. It's almost a 50-50 split in New England. Obviously, if you're a non-PPR, Elliott does get a bit of a boost. They got a great matchup this next week against the New York Giants. I bet Zeke probably finds the end zone. Honestly, Ramondre probably will too. You're definitely okay picking up and playing Zeke this week if you want to. Kenneth Gainwell, I want to talk about him. We're seeing a lot of usage out of DeAndre Swift. We know how fragile he's been over the years. I just think Kenneth Gainwell is under rostered right now. He's a guy that would obviously be the lead running back in a really good offense if something were to happen to Swift. And I don't think we'd all be all that shocked if anything did happen to Swift. So I think Gainwell needs to be rostered at this point. He's someone, even if you're rostering DeAndre Swift, I've talked many times in this channel so far about how just great DeAndre Swift's fantasy playoff schedule is. And if something were to happen to Swift, that would be Kenneth Gainwell's fantasy schedule. So Gainwell's got to be rostered. He's obviously got league winning upside if something happened to Swift. Tajay Spears, I'll talk about him. He's also got a really great playoff schedule. They play the Texans twice in the 3 fantasy playoff weeks. If anything did happen to Derrick Henry, Spears could easily be a league winner as well. Then I want to talk about both Dearness Johnson and Rico Dowdle. Dearness Johnson sort of seemed to pass Tank Bigsby in the pecking order for the Jaguars. I still think, obviously, this is fully Travis Etienne's backfield, but if anything were to happen to Etienne, I think there's a case to be made that Dearness Johnson could be the guy you want to roster. And Rico Dowdle, I talked about him a little bit. We didn't really see the uptick in snaps from this last week, but he did pop up on the injury report on Friday. It could have been injury related. I do think Dowdle needs to be rostered because if something were to happen to Pollard, Dowdle's obviously got league winning upside, so he's worth just rostering to see what happens with him going forward. Next up, we got the wide receiver position. A lot of guys I want to talk about here. I'll start things off with Tank Dell. Obviously, he shouldn't be rostered in any competitive leagues, but if for whatever reason he is, he's a must-add. If you want to drop 100% of your fab, do it. I think he's a top 15 wide receiver potentially the rest of the season. CJ Stroud's playing like a baller. He's obviously an elite quarterback at this point. Tank Dell is pretty clearly the wide receiver 1 in the offense. Tank Dell's a superstar wide receiver. I think we've got to start looking at him similar to the way we saw like Amon-Ra St. Brown in his rookie season. He's going to be a stud. He's going to win people leagues, so get him on your roster. Jaden Reed, another guy that I really think is budding into a potential superstar in this league. He's honestly, in my opinion, the best wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. He looks really good. He's explosive. He's just seems like a more polished route runner than a guy like Christian Watson. I think he's going to emerge as that clear number 1 wide receiver in this offense. I want him on my rosters for sure, and he's someone that I really do think has upside going forward. I want to talk about JSN as well. We saw him honestly more involved in this offense this last week. Obviously, it didn't turn into a big game by any means, and I know that Tyler Lockett was banged up with a hamstring injury, but if something were to happen to Lockett or DK Metcalf, I think you could immediately start slotting in JSN as like a solid wide receiver 3 the rest of the way. Not a great matchup this week, and obviously we're probably not going to have Geno Smith. We'll see what happens with him on Thursday, but with Geno under center and all these really brutal matchups going forward, I think we might need to see the Seahawks throw the ball a little bit more, and JSN could be a big part of that. We're going to talk about Noah Brown as well. It's possible he got dropped after being ruled out this week. This honestly a chance that he's probably still the wide receiver 3 in this offense. But we saw how well he played early on the last 2 weeks with Nico Collins out. He's obviously a talented player. CJ Stroud's good enough to distribute the ball to a lot of guys, and Brown does need to be on rosters. Zay Jones, I'll talk about him. Obviously didn't do a lot this week, but he honestly has a shot to be relevant in fantasy. He was really good the first couple of weeks of the season. He's got to go to near the goal line, and he's a good player in what should be a really good offense. So I think Zay Jones needs to be rostered in more leagues. Odell Beckham, I'll talk about him as well. Had over 100 receiving yards for the first time this season this last week. Looked a lot better. He did leave the game with a shoulder injury, but I don't think it's going to be anything that sidelines him. And obviously with Mark Andrews being banged up, probably missing the rest of the season, there's going to be a lot more targets to go around. So Odell could certainly be a benefactor there. Demario Douglas potentially got dropped from leagues in leagues where people just couldn't hold him on their roster through the bye, but he's very clearly the wide receiver 1 in New England. He needs to be rostered in more leagues, and he's a guy that could very easily be like a low-end wide receiver 3 the rest of the way with some upside if he ever scores a touchdown. Khalil Shakir, I don't really buy it as a guy that you can trust on a week-to-week basis, but he's pretty clearly the wide receiver 3 in this Buffalo Bills offense. Defenses seem to sort of be shutting down both Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs the last couple of weeks. If that becomes a trend and they start having to use those ancillary pieces a lot more, Shakir could be a guy that maybe you want to throw in as like a dart throw on your flex spot every now and then. He's a good player. I like him on film, and he's just not someone that is involved enough in the offense to really trust. But if something happened to any of the guys ahead of him, he'd obviously be a really quality asset and someone that I do think needs to be rostered. And I'll talk about Rondale Moore, Greg Dortch, and Michael Wilson. Rondale Moore obviously only had one catch, but it was for a 50-yard touchdown. Greg Dortch was relatively involved as well. And then Michael Wilson didn't play this last week, but I think he's probably the guy I'd prefer to roster. Kyler Murray looks like he's obviously taking this offense to a new level. It's obviously still rusty as well. Didn't play his best game this last week, but this offense is going to be a lot better going forward. And in that, I think there's going to be opportunities for pass catchers here. So throw a dart if you want to, if you got an extra spot in your roster. I think all three of these guys have potential to be valuable in fantasy, and I wouldn't mind rostering any of them. I don't think Greg Dortch really needs to be, because he really only sees the field when there's an injury to a wide receiver. But if you want to take a dart throw there, he could be a guy that you want to look at as well. Next, at the tight end position, I'll start things off with Isaiah Likely. I touched on it earlier. We did have Mark Andrews go down with an ankle injury, potentially going to miss the rest of the season. Likely hasn't done a whole lot so far this season, but there is a chance here for him to really step up into that role. Obviously, this is an offense that runs through the tight end quite a bit. So Likely is a guy that's shown flashes in the past and obviously has potential to be a high-end performer. So he should be rostered for sure. Taysom Hill, obviously, potentially he got dropped this last week. I doubt it. He's been performing so well, but if he did get dropped and he's on the waiver wire, Hill would need to be rostered and be a really nice replacement for Andrews, honestly. Luke Musgrave, this continues to look good. The Packers passing offense I talked about already as well. I think they're going to have to lean on a little bit more. Might have to throw the ball, air it out a little bit more. And I think Jordan Love's starting to play a little bit better. So Musgrave would be someone that you can play in plus matchups. And this week against the Bears would be one of those. Logan Thomas, another guy that just is good enough that you can play him in like, especially in PPR formats. He's involved enough in the offense. They're having to throw the ball a ton. And Logan Thomas is good enough that does need to be rostered. And then Cade Otton, a guy that obviously looked a little bit better this last week. He's been a little bit more involved in the offense. And they've got a couple of really good matchups coming up, especially this week against the Colts. So I think you can pick up and play Cade Otton this week or Cade Otton if you need to this week. And then finally, I'll talk about the defenses. I'll start things off with the Dolphins. They'd be my favorite ad for just this week. They get the New York Jets. They're going to have Tim Boyle under center. The Dolphins are going to have no problem potentially shutting out the Jets this week. So they're a really quality option. The Chiefs would be my favorite ad overall. They've got a really great playoff schedule. The only tough playoff matchup they might have had was against the Bengals, but now that's going to be an easy matchup with Joe Burrow out for the rest of the way. The Chiefs are a really elite defense. They play the Raiders. They'd be a really high quality ad here. The Titans, a mediocre defense, but they play the Carolina Panthers. Bryce Young threw another pick six this last week. It's certainly a defense or an offense that we can target. So the Titans are a decent option. The Broncos defense could be on waivers in your league. I know they've been playing a lot better lately, and they're creating a lot of turnovers. They play the Cleveland Browns this next week. Could end up being a really low scoring game. And I think that the Broncos defense could be a really solid option. And the Patriots probably on waivers again. Obviously haven't been the stereotypical really good Patriots defense, but they play the New York Giants this week. I know the Giants looked better this last week, but if you need to go there, I think the Giants are probably not going to be able to repeat that. So the Patriots could be a good option. And as well, I just want to mention it's time to start planning for the playoffs. If you are for sure in the playoffs, you can start looking ahead, stashing a couple defenses. Highly recommend that you go watch my trade target video from last week. At the end of that video, I talked about some defenses that have really good playoff schedules. Go take a look at that one. I think all of those guys' defenses are going to be guys that could really help elevate your roster. But then also plenty of other defenses. If you want to piece it together, you probably need maybe 2, maybe even 3 defenses for that playoff stretch. And just take a look, see which matchups you like. And it's definitely about time to be doing that because we want to be poised to have the best rosters possible once we get there. So that'll do it for this week's waiver wire video. Up next, I'll be giving you guys the buy low and sell high videos. I'll go over my trade targets. This is obviously going to be a really big week for trades as well. I know a lot of you guys are coming up on your trade deadlines. Maybe you guys had it this last week. I know one of my leagues was tonight, obviously, and then I've got another one that's next week. Or after this week's game. So obviously lots of trades that are going to happen this week. Got to get our rosters all set for the playoffs and help take things home. So as always, if you guys have any specific questions, just let me know in the comments. If you guys haven't subscribed already, we're at like 955. Just need 44 more to hit that goal of 1,000 by the end of the year. I really think we can do that. Just help me out, subscribe if you haven't already. And I really appreciate you guys so much. So that being said, I'll catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.